The ice remembers everything. That is what I learned during my 6 months at Station Polaris, and that is what I will carry with me until the day I die. My name is Hank and I am 32 years old. I used to manage a remote communications tower in the Arctic Circle, 90 miles north of Deadhorse, Alaska. I say used to because I will never go back there, not for any amount of money, not even if they threaten to take everything I own. Some places change you. Some places show you things that cannot be unseen, whispers that cannot be unheard. Station Polaris was one of those places. Before I tell you what happened up there, I want you to understand something. I was not some paranoid conspiracy theorist or someone who believed in ghosts. I was a communications engineer with a degree from MIT and 8 years of field experience. I believed in data, in frequencies, in the measurable world. I believed that everything had a logical explanation. I do not believe that anymore. If you have ever wondered what really happens in those frozen places where humans barely survive, where the sun disappears for months and the ice stretches endlessly in all directions, then stay with me. And if you find this story unsettling, if it makes you question what lies beneath the surface of our world, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because what I am about to tell you needs to be remembered. It needs to be a warning. I arrived at Station Polaris on September 15th. The helicopter pilot who flew me in was a grizzled man named Roy, maybe 60 years old, with a face weathered by decades of Arctic winds. He did not say much during the 2-hour flight from Deadhorse, but as we approached the station, he leaned over and shouted above the rotor noise. "You ever been this far north before?" I shook my head. "It is different up here," he said. "The ice plays tricks, sound carries strange. You will hear things that are not there." He paused, his eyes distant. "And sometimes you will not hear things that are." I thought he was just trying to spook the new guy. I wish I had listened. Station Polaris sat on a rocky outcrop surrounded by an ocean of ice. The tower itself was a massive structure, 200 feet tall, bristling with satellite dishes and antenna arrays. The station building was connected to the tower base, a squat rectangular structure painted bright orange so it could be spotted against the white landscape. Solar panels and a wind turbine provided power, supplemented by diesel generators for the long polar night. The station had been built 15 years earlier as part of a military communications network. Now it was operated by a private contractor, relaying signals for research stations, weather data, and emergency communications. My job was simple: keep everything running, perform routine maintenance, and report any anomalies. The contract was for 6 months. They were paying me $80,000 plus hazard pay. For a guy with student loans and a failed marriage, it seemed like a good deal. I was replacing a man named Thomas. He had requested an early extraction after only 4 months. The company representative who briefed me in Anchorage said Thomas had cited personal reasons for leaving. They did not elaborate, and I did not ask. People burned out in isolated postings all the time. I figured I could handle it. I had done remote work before, though never somewhere this extreme. Roy helped me unload my supplies: 6 months of freeze-dried food, batteries, spare parts, fuel drums, and personal items. The company sent supplies every 2 months by helicopter, weather permitting. Between drops, I would be completely alone. "The previous guy left some stuff," Roy said, nodding toward the station. "Company said you could use it or toss it. Your call." "Did you know him, Thomas?" Roy was quiet for a moment, securing the cargo straps. "Met him once, when I flew him out." He looked up at me. He did not look good, kept staring back at the ice like something was following him. "Cabin fever," I said. "Maybe." Roy did not sound convinced. "You got everything you need." I nodded. "All right then." He climbed back into the helicopter. "Next supply drop is scheduled for November 15th. You got the satellite phone if you need emergency extraction before then. But Hank," he waited until I looked at him, "if you start hearing things, do not go looking for the source. Trust me on that." Then he lifted off, and I watched the helicopter become a small black dot against the gray sky, then disappear entirely. The sound of the rotors faded, swallowed by the wind, and I was alone. The silence hit me first. It was not peaceful. It was oppressive, heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes just listening to nothing. The wind was barely a whisper. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just me and the ice and that tower reaching up into the colorless sky. I forced myself to move. There was work to do. The station interior was functional but cramped. The main room served as living quarters, kitchen, and workspace. There was a small bedroom, a bathroom with a chemical toilet and a shower that recycled water, and the equipment room where all the communications gear was housed. Everything was designed for efficiency and survival, not comfort. Thomas had left behind some personal items, a few books, a jacket, a coffee mug. I also found a journal on the desk in the main room. I flipped through it. Most of it was routine maintenance logs, nothing unusual. But the last few entries were different. The handwriting became erratic, harder to read. I found one entry dated just 3 days before he left. The signal again, 3:17 a.m., same frequency. It is not random, I am sure now. It is not random. That was it. The rest of the pages were blank. I set the journal aside. Whatever Thomas had been dealing with, it was not my problem. I had my own job to focus on. The first 2 weeks passed without incident. I settled into a routine. Wake at 7:00 a.m., check all systems, perform maintenance tasks, monitor communications traffic, prepare meals, read, exercise, sleep. The work was not particularly difficult. Most of the time, the equipment ran itself. I was really just there in case something broke. The polar night was approaching. Each day, the sun hung lower on the horizon, giving less and less light. By early October, we were down to just a few hours of twilight. The darkness was coming. I tried to stay busy. I read the books Thomas had left, mostly thrillers and science fiction. I did push-ups and sit-ups to stay in shape. I sent brief messages to my sister back in Denver via the satellite internet connection, though the bandwidth was terrible and the latency was awful. Mostly, I just tried not to think about the isolation. But the silence was always there, that crushing absolute silence. It was on October 8th that I first heard the signal. I was in the equipment room running diagnostics on the main relay system. It was 3:17 a.m. I remember the time exactly because I glanced at the clock when it happened. I was monitoring the spectrum analyzer, watching the usual traffic when a new signal appeared. It was on a frequency that should have been empty. We were not authorized to use that band, and there were no other stations within 300 miles that should have been broadcasting on it. But there it was, clear as day. A strong, steady signal at 4.721 megahertz. I adjusted the receiver, trying to isolate it. The signal was not voice or data, it was something else. A pattern, a repeating sequence of pulses, long and short, almost like Morse code but not quite. The rhythm was off, irregular in a way that seemed deliberate. I recorded it and tried to trace the source. The directional antenna suggested it was coming from somewhere close, very close, but that was impossible. There was nothing out there but ice. I spent 2 hours trying to figure it out. I checked every piece of equipment, thinking maybe there was a malfunction causing interference. Everything was operating normally. The signal was real. It was coming from somewhere outside the station. Finally, at 5:31 a.m., it stopped, just cut off mid-pattern. I waited for it to return, but it did not. The frequency was silent again. I was exhausted. I told myself I would investigate more after I got some sleep. I went to bed, but I could not stop thinking about it, about Thomas's journal entry, the same frequency, 3:17 a.m. I finally drifted off around 7:00 a.m. When I woke up 6 hours later, I checked the recordings. The signal was there, exactly as I remembered. I had not imagined it. I ran it through every analysis tool I had, trying to find a pattern, but the sequence did not match any known protocol. It was not Morse code. It was not binary. It was not any civilian or military system I was familiar with. I sent a report to the company via the satellite link, describing what I had found. I asked if there were any other stations or research facilities in the area that might be transmitting on that frequency. The response came back 8 hours later. No authorized stations within range. Likely atmospheric interference or equipment malfunction. Continue monitoring. Report if signal repeats. Atmospheric interference. That was the official explanation, but I knew what I had heard. That signal was not random noise. It had structure, purpose. I tried to put it out of my mind. I went through my normal routine, but I kept glancing at the clock as it crept toward 3:17 a.m. When the time came, I was in the equipment room watching the spectrum analyzer. I waited. 3:15 a.m., 3:16 a.m., 3:17 a.m. Nothing. I felt foolish. Maybe it had just been a one-time thing, some strange propagation effect, a reflection off the ionosphere, a glitch in the system. I was about to shut down the equipment and go to bed when it happened. 3:23 a.m. The signal came back. Same frequency, same pattern, but this time it was stronger, much stronger. The analyzer showed it was coming from directly beneath the station. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Beneath the station. That meant it was coming from under the ice. I grabbed the portable receiver and headed outside. The cold hit me like a physical blow. Even through my heavy parka and insulated gear, the Arctic night was brutal. The temperature was around -30 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind made it feel even colder. My breath crystallized instantly in the beam of my headlamp. I walked around the perimeter of the station, holding the receiver, trying to get a better fix on the signal. The antenna array showed the strongest reading when I pointed it straight down into the ice. I stood there in the darkness, listening to the receiver crackle with that strange, rhythmic pattern. The ice beneath my feet was hundreds of feet thick. There should not have been anything down there. Nothing could broadcast a signal through that much ice. Nothing human anyway. The signal continued for exactly 17 minutes, then stopped. I went back inside and pulled up geological surveys of the area. Station Polaris was built on a stable ice sheet, anchored to a rocky island beneath. The nearest open water was 30 miles away. According to the surveys, there were no caves, no underground structures, nothing that could explain a signal source. I checked Thomas's journal again, reading more carefully this time. I found other entries I had missed before. October 3rd, signal at 3:17 a.m., 17 minutes duration, same pattern. I tried to decode it, no success. October 6th, signal again. I think it is trying to communicate, but with who? There is no one else here. October 10th, took readings outside. Signal is definitely coming from below. How deep? Why? October 14th. I hear it even when the receiver is off. In my head, the pattern over and over. I cannot sleep. The entries stopped after that. Thomas had left 3 days later. I sat there in the equipment room, reading and rereading those words. I hear it even when the receiver is off. In my head. No, I was not going to let paranoia take hold. I was a scientist. There was a rational explanation for this. There had to be. But over the next week, the signal kept coming. Every night. Sometimes at 3:17 a.m., sometimes at other times, but always from beneath the ice. Always the same inexplicable pattern. I recorded everything. I sent detailed reports to the company. Their responses became shorter and more dismissive. Atmospheric conditions, equipment malfunction, interference from the tower itself. They did not take it seriously. On October 20th, something changed. I was monitoring the signal as usual when I noticed something new in the pattern. A variation. A segment that repeated 3 times, then shifted. I ran it through a correlation algorithm trying to find anything, a language pattern, a mathematical sequence, anything that would make sense. And then I saw it. The pattern was not random, it was structured, layers within layers, like a fractal. Each segment contained smaller versions of the same pattern nested infinitely deep. The more I analyzed it, the more complexity I found. It was not a simple message. It was something far more sophisticated. I worked for hours, barely aware of time passing. I felt like I was on the edge of understanding something profound. The pattern seemed to shift and change as I looked at it, revealing new structures, new meanings. When I finally looked up from the screen, it was 8:34 a.m. I had been working for over 5 hours straight. My eyes burned, my head throbbed, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. The signal had stopped hours ago, at 3:40 a.m. according to the logs, but I had kept hearing it. I had kept analyzing it. Even though the receiver was picking up nothing but static, I had heard the pattern continuing in my mind. I hear it even when the receiver is off. I stood up too quickly and had to grab the desk to steady myself. I was exhausted. I needed sleep. That was all, just exhaustion playing tricks on me. I stumbled to the bedroom and collapsed on the bunk. Sleep came quickly, but it was not restful. I dreamed of the ice, of standing on the surface looking down through crystal clear frozen water. Hundreds of feet down I could see something, a shape, vast and dark and impossibly old. It was not moving, but somehow I knew it was aware of me, that it had always been aware of me, that it had been waiting. In the dream, I pressed my ear against the ice and heard that signal, that pattern, resonating up through the frozen depths. And this time I understood it, not the meaning. I could never quite grasp the meaning, but the intent. It was not trying to communicate with me. It was trying to wake me up. I jolted awake, gasping. My room was dark except for the faint glow of the emergency lights. I checked the time. 3:17 a.m. I lay there listening. The station was quiet except for the hum of the generators and the whistle of wind outside. No signal, not yet. But I knew it was coming. I forced myself to stay in bed. I was not going to give in to paranoia. I was not going to become like Thomas, obsessing over some unexplained phenomenon. In the morning, I would contact the company again and request an early extraction. I would tell them I needed a medical evaluation. They would understand. This posting was breaking me, just like it had broken Thomas. But even as I made that decision, I found myself listening, waiting. At 3:23 a.m. I heard it. Not through the equipment, through the walls, through the floor, a deep, resonant pulse that I felt more than heard. The same pattern, the same rhythm. I got up and went to the equipment room. The spectrum analyzer showed nothing unusual. No signal on 4.721 megahertz, nothing on any frequency. But I could hear it, feel it, a vibration that seemed to come from the ice itself. I stood in the middle of the room trying to understand. The signal was not electromagnetic, it was something else. Something that bypassed the equipment entirely and went straight to, what? My mind, my body. The vibration continued for 17 minutes, then stopped. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the main room, drinking coffee, watching the darkness outside the windows. When dawn finally came, a brief, pale twilight that lasted less than an hour, I sent an emergency message to the company requesting immediate extraction. The response came 6 hours later. Request noted. Next available helicopter window is November 15th. Weather conditions prohibit earlier extraction. If medical emergency, advise immediately. November 15th. That was 3.5 weeks away. I could claim a medical emergency. They would have to send someone, but what would I say? That I was hearing signals that did not exist, that I felt a presence beneath the ice. They would think I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. I decided to wait 3.5 weeks. I could last that long. I would just have to stay rational, stay focused, and not let my imagination run wild. That night I took sleeping pills from the medical kit and managed to get a few hours of dreamless rest. When I woke, I felt better, more stable. I made a plan. Stick to routine, avoid the equipment room at night, stay away from the signal. For 2 days, it worked. I did not hear anything unusual. The signal did not appear on the spectrum analyzer. I started to think that maybe it was over, that whatever phenomenon had been occurring had stopped. Then, on October 23rd, I found the hatch. I was doing a routine inspection of the tower base, checking for ice damage to the foundation. The tower was built on a reinforced concrete pad that extended down to bedrock. As I walked around the perimeter with my flashlight, I noticed something I had never seen before. A metal hatch, maybe 3 feet square, flush with the concrete. It was covered with ice and snow, which was why I had missed it on previous inspections. I cleared it off and saw it was secured with a heavy padlock that had rusted in the salt air. There were words stenciled on the metal, faded but still legible. Authorized personnel only. Station Polaris subsurface access. Emergency use only. Subsurface access. There was something beneath the station, an underground structure that had never been mentioned in any of the briefings or documentation I had received. I tried the padlock. It was frozen solid. I considered leaving it alone, but my curiosity was too strong. Why had no one told me about this? What was down there? I went back inside and found a bolt cutter in the tool room. It took 10 minutes of effort in the freezing wind, but I finally cut through the rusted lock. I lifted the hatch. A ladder descended into darkness. Cold air, even colder than outside, flowed up from below. I shone my flashlight down and saw the ladder continued for maybe 30 feet before reaching a floor. I should have closed the hatch and walked away. Every instinct told me not to go down there, but I thought about Thomas. I thought about that signal. I thought about the company's dismissive responses to my reports. If there was something down there, I needed to know what it was. I climbed down. The ladder was slick with ice and I had to move carefully. My headlamp beam bounced off metal and concrete. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a corridor carved through solid rock and ice. It extended in both directions, disappearing into darkness. The walls were covered with frost, but I could see they were not natural. This was man-made, built for some specific purpose. I chose a direction at random and started walking. The corridor was about 6 feet wide and 7 feet high, just enough space for a person to move comfortably. Every 20 feet, there were light fixtures mounted on the ceiling, but they were dark. No power down here. I walked for maybe 5 minutes, my breath creating clouds of vapor in the freezing air when I came to a door. It was heavy steel with a wheel lock, like something you would see on a ship or a submarine. There was a small window at eye level, thick glass reinforced with wire mesh. I looked through the window. On the other side was a room filled with equipment, old equipment, banks of machines that looked like they were from the 1960s or 70s, reel-to-reel tape drives, oscilloscopes, a massive radio transmitter. Everything was covered in a thick layer of ice and dust. I tried the wheel lock. It was frozen, but I put my weight into it and felt it move slightly. I worked it back and forth, gradually breaking the ice seal until finally it turned. The door opened with a groan of protesting metal. I stepped inside. The room was maybe 30 feet square. Along one wall was the equipment I had seen through the window. Along another wall were filing cabinets, also frozen shut. In the center of the room was a table with papers scattered across it, preserved by the cold. I picked up one of the papers. It was a report, dated October 1971. Project Deep Echo Status Report 37 Classification, Top Secret. I read quickly, my hands shaking from more than just the cold. The report described a military research project. During the Cold War, the United States had built a network of underground listening posts in the Arctic, designed to detect Soviet submarines and monitor communications. Station Polaris had been one of them. But this particular station had been shut down after only 6 months of operation. According to the report, the personnel had detected an anomalous signal coming from beneath the ice. They had tried to identify the source but failed. The signal had continued, growing stronger until it began affecting the researchers. Sleep disturbances, auditory hallucinations, psychological breakdown. The project was abandoned. The underground facility was sealed. The surface station was eventually repurposed for civilian communications, but the existence of Project Deep Echo was classified and forgotten. I found more papers, technical analyses of the signal, attempts to decode it, psychological evaluations of the affected personnel. The last report was dated November 1971. All personnel evacuated. Facility sealed pending further investigation. Recommendation: permanent closure. The source of the signal remains unknown. We do not understand what we are dealing with. We only know that we must not listen to it. I stood there in that frozen room, 50 feet below the ice, reading words written 50 years ago by people who had experienced exactly what I was experiencing. They had heard the signal, they had tried to understand it, and it had broken them. I heard a sound behind me and spun around, my heart hammering. Nothing, the corridor was empty. But I felt it, a presence, a weight in the air like the pressure before a storm, and I heard very faintly that rhythmic pattern, not from above, not from any equipment, from deeper, much deeper. From below. I do not remember climbing back up that ladder. I do not remember sealing the hatch or going back inside the station. The next thing I clearly remember is sitting in the main room, staring at the documents I had brought up with me, spread across the table. Project Deep Echo, a secret military installation built directly above something they did not understand, something that had been down there long before humans arrived, something that had been signaling, calling, waiting. I checked the calendar. November 15th, the next supply helicopter was still 2.5 weeks away. I could not wait that long. I needed to get out of there now. I grabbed the satellite phone and dialed the emergency extraction number. It rang 5 times, then connected. Emergency services. State the nature of your emergency. This is Station Polaris. I need immediate extraction. I need to leave right now. What is the nature of your emergency, sir? Are you injured? No, I am. How could I explain? There is something wrong with the station. I have discovered an unauthorized structure beneath the facility. I need to report it. Please hold. I waited for 10 minutes. The line crackled with static. Finally, someone else came on, a supervisor, judging by her tone. This is Christine Morrison. I understand you have discovered something at your location. I explained everything. The signal, the hatch, Project Deep Echo, the classified documents. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence. Sir, we are aware of the subsurface structure. It was part of the original military installation. It is abandoned and sealed. You should not have accessed it. But the signal. There is no signal. You have been isolated for 6 weeks. You are experiencing stress-related symptoms. This is not uncommon in remote postings. I have recordings, I said. I have documentation. This is real. Sir, I strongly advise you to remain calm. The next helicopter will arrive as scheduled on November 15th. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, we can arrange for a medical consultation via satellite link. I am not having a mental health crisis. There is something beneath this station that... The line went dead. I tried calling back. The phone would not connect. I checked the satellite link. No internet, no connection to the outside world at all. I went to the equipment room and checked the systems. Everything was functioning normally. The satellite dishes were aligned. The transmitters were working, but somehow nothing was getting through. I was cut off, completely isolated. I tried not to panic. I forced myself to think logically. The helicopter would come on November 15th no matter what. I just had to survive until then. 16 more days. I could do that. That night I did not even pretend to sleep. I sat in the main room with all the lights on, drinking coffee, watching the clock crawl toward 3:17 a.m. When the time came, I heard it. That deep vibration resonating up through the floor, the pattern that I now recognized from those 50-year-old documents, the signal that had driven Project Deep Echo researchers to madness. But this time it was different. This time I heard something else beneath the rhythm, a sound like voices, not words, not language, just the impression of voices, thousands of them, calling from somewhere impossibly deep beneath the ice. The vibration continued for 17 minutes as always. Then it stopped. I sat there in the silence, and I understood something terrible. The signal was not trying to communicate. It was not a message or a warning. It was a heartbeat. Something was alive down there. Something vast and ancient, buried beneath miles of Arctic ice. And it had been sleeping for longer than human civilization had existed. But it was waking up. Over the next week, the signals became more frequent, not just at night anymore, sometimes at dawn, sometimes in the middle of the day. The pattern was changing, becoming more complex, more active. And I could feel it in my bones, that presence growing stronger, rising, like something immense stirring from a deep sleep. I stopped eating. I could not keep food down. I stopped sleeping entirely. Every time I closed my eyes, I had that same dream, standing on the ice, looking down into impossible depths, seeing that dark shape rising toward me. I spent my time monitoring the equipment, documenting everything, even though no one would ever see my reports. I recorded the signals. I wrote detailed notes. I made charts and graphs. It was all I could do to hold on to sanity. On November 10th, 5 days before the scheduled extraction, I heard something new. I was outside, checking the tower supports. When I heard it, a sound from the ice itself, a crack, then another, deep, resonant sounds like distant thunder. I looked out across the ice field and saw something that stopped my heart. Cracks spreading across the surface like spiderwebs. The ice was breaking up. But that was impossible. It was the wrong time of year. The temperature was far below freezing. The ice should have been solid for months. I watched as the cracks widened, dark water visible in the gaps. Steam rose from the openings, which meant the water below was warmer than it should have been. Something was generating heat beneath the ice, a lot of heat. I ran back inside and checked the seismic monitors. There was activity, significant activity, movement deep underground, kilometers below the surface. The readings were off the scale. I grabbed the satellite phone, praying it would work. It did not, still no signal. I was completely cut off, and something was happening beneath me, something big. That night the vibration was so strong that it shook the entire station. Equipment fell off shelves. Coffee spilled across the floor. I held onto the table and felt the building tremble like it was caught in an earthquake. The lights flickered. The generators stuttered. For a moment everything went dark, and I was alone in absolute blackness, feeling the world shake around me. Then the emergency lights came on, casting everything in a sick red glow. The vibration stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. A sound from outside. A groaning, creaking noise like the earth itself was crying out in pain. I went to the window and looked out. The ice was moving, shifting, great sheets of it breaking apart and tilting at impossible angles. And from the cracks, light was emerging. A pale, cold light that was not moonlight or starlight but something else entirely. Something that came from below. I watched, frozen with terror and fascination, as that light grew brighter. It illuminated the ice field, casting strange shadows, and I saw something that my mind struggled to process. The ice was not just breaking, it was being pushed up from beneath. Something massive was rising. I do not know how long I stood there. Minutes, hours. Time seemed to lose meaning. All I could do was watch as that terrible light grew brighter and the ice continued to crack and shift. And then finally I saw it. A shape rising through the fractured ice, vast beyond comprehension. Not a creature exactly, not anything biological, more like a structure, an architecture of angles and planes that did not obey normal geometry. It hurt to look at, like my eyes could not quite focus on it correctly. It rose slowly, impossibly, breaking through hundreds of feet of ice like it was nothing. And as it rose, it brought that light with it. That cold, ancient light that had been buried beneath the Arctic for longer than humans had existed. I finally understood what Project Deep Echo had discovered. They had found this thing, or the edge of it, sleeping in the deep places of the Earth. They had heard its signal and tried to understand it. And when they could not, when it began to affect them in ways they could not control, they had sealed their station and fled. But sealing a door does not stop a signal. It does not stop a dream. And it certainly does not stop something this old, this patient, this inevitable. The structure continued to rise, and I realized that what I was seeing was only a small part of it. The rest extended down into the earth, deeper than I could imagine. This was just the tip of something that reached all the way to the core of the world. The signal was not a message. It was a lighthouse, a beacon, and it had been broadcasting for eons, waiting for someone to hear it, waiting for someone to understand. And now that someone had listened, now that I had opened that hatch and descended into the dark and touched those old documents and tried to understand, it knew I was here. It knew. I stumbled away from the window and ran to the equipment room. I had to document this. I had to record everything. Even if no one believed me, even if they thought I had lost my mind, I needed to leave a record. I grabbed my camera and my recording equipment and went back outside. The cold was intense, but I barely felt it. I filmed everything: the fractured ice, the rising structure, the unnatural light. I recorded audio, though I knew no microphone could capture the reality of what I was experiencing. The pressure, the weight, the sense of standing before something so ancient and so alien that human understanding was meaningless in its presence. I worked until my fingers were numb and my camera battery died. Then I went back inside and backed up everything to multiple hard drives. I wrote a final report, describing everything I had seen and experienced. I included the Project Deep Echo documents. I made copies of Thomas's journal. If the helicopter came, if I survived to be extracted, I would bring all of this with me. People needed to know. They needed to understand what was buried beneath the Arctic ice. But as I worked, I felt something change. The vibration, which had been constant for hours, suddenly stopped. The light outside dimmed. The groaning of the ice ceased. I went to the window. The structure was still there, risen maybe 50 feet above the ice, a dark silhouette against the stars. But it was not moving anymore. It was still. Waiting. I checked the time, 3:17 a.m. In the silence I heard something. Not the vibration, not the signal, something else. A voice. Not speaking words, not in any language, but somehow I understood it, not with my ears or my mind, deeper than that. It was asking a question. Do you understand? I stood there in the cold station, surrounded by equipment and data, and my futile attempts to make sense of the incomprehensible, and I realized the truth. No, I did not understand. Humans could never understand. We were like insects trying to comprehend the ocean. We lacked the framework, the context, the fundamental perspective needed to grasp what this thing was. But understanding was not the point. Listening was. The signal had been broadcasting for millions of years, waiting for someone to develop the technology to hear it. We had finally reached that point. We had built our towers and our satellites and our receivers, and we had heard that ancient call. And now it knew we were here. It knew we were listening. What happened next was not up to me. The remaining days passed in a blur. The structure did not move again. The ice slowly began to refreeze, though the cracks remained visible, dark lines spreading out from that risen shape like a crack in a mirror. I maintained my routine because I needed something to hold on to. I ate when I remembered. I slept in brief, nightmare-filled intervals. I waited for November 15th. When I heard the helicopter on the morning of extraction day, I felt a surge of relief so intense that my legs nearly gave out. I grabbed my backpack, which contained all the documentation, all the recordings, everything I needed to prove what had happened. Roy landed the helicopter on the pad next to the station. I ran out, not bothering to lock the door behind me, desperate to leave that place forever. Roy looked older than I remembered, more weathered. He helped me load my gear, then paused, looking past me at the ice field. "What the hell happened out there?" he asked, pointing. I turned. The cracks were still visible, spreading out from the station in every direction, and in the distance that shape, that risen structure, dark against the white ice. "You see it?" I asked. "Of course I see it. Looks like the ice buckled. Seismic activity." "Something like that." He stared at it for a long moment. "Thomas said something about the ice moving, said he saw things. I thought he was just losing it." "He was not losing it." Roy looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. Whatever he saw in my face made him frown. "Let us get you out of here." The flight back to Deadhorse took 2 hours. I spent the entire time staring out the window, watching Station Polaris shrink behind me. Even from miles away, I could see that dark shape rising from the ice, an impossibility that refused to disappear. When we landed in Deadhorse, there were people waiting for me, company representatives. They were very polite, very professional. They took me to a private room and asked me questions, lots of questions. I told them everything. I showed them my recordings, my documentation, the Project Deep Echo files. They listened patiently and took notes. Then they told me that I had experienced a severe stress reaction due to prolonged isolation. They said the structure I had seen was a natural ice formation, caused by pressure buildups beneath the surface. They said the signal was electromagnetic interference from the tower itself, amplified by my sleep-deprived mind. They said Thomas had reported similar symptoms before his extraction. They offered me a generous severance package, 6 months' salary plus bonuses, in addition to what I had already earned. All I had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement and agree to undergo psychological evaluation and treatment. I asked what would happen if I refused. They said that would be unfortunate. They reminded me that I had accessed a restricted area without authorization. They said I had violated multiple security protocols. They suggested that criminal charges could be filed if necessary. I signed the papers. They kept my recordings. They kept my documentation. They kept the Project Deep Echo files. They gave me a laptop with my personal photos and emails, but everything related to Station Polaris was gone. They drove me to the airport and put me on a flight to Anchorage, then another to Denver. Throughout the journey, I kept checking the news, searching for any mention of unusual activity in the Arctic. Seismic events, ice formations, anything. There was nothing. I tried to find information about Project Deep Echo online. Nothing. No records. No declassified documents. It was like it had never existed. I spoke to a journalist, trying to tell my story. She was interested at first, but when I could not provide any evidence, any proof, she politely suggested I speak to a therapist. I did speak to a therapist, several of them. They diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder, adjustment disorder, and possible dissociative episodes. They prescribed medication. They recommended rest and a gradual return to normal life. But normal life seemed impossible. Every night I heard that pattern in my head, that signal. I would wake at 3:17 a.m., pulse pounding, feeling that vibration in my bones even though I was thousands of miles from the Arctic. It has been 8 months since I left Station Polaris. I am living with my sister in Denver now. I am not working. I cannot focus long enough to hold down a job, but I am trying. I monitor seismic activity in the Arctic. The scientific stations up there have been recording unusual readings. Small earthquakes, pressure variations, temperature anomalies, nothing major, nothing that makes the news, but I see the patterns. The activity is increasing. Something is still happening up there. Something is still waking up. I tried to contact Thomas, the man I replaced. I found him living in a small town in Montana. He would not speak to me on the phone, but he sent me a brief email. Do not try to warn people. They will not listen. They cannot listen. Some things are too big for human minds to accept. Just try to live your life. Try to forget. But I cannot forget, and I do not think I should. That is why I am telling you this story. Not because I think you can do anything about it. Not because I expect you to believe me, but because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to know that there are things in the deep places of the earth, things that have been sleeping since before humans existed, and those things are waking up. The ice remembers everything, and what sleeps beneath it has been patient beyond measure. If you have made it this far, if you have listened to my story, do me one more favor. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Leave a comment telling me if you have ever experienced something you could not explain, something that made you question everything you thought you knew about the world. Because I need to know I am not alone in this. I need to know that other people have seen the cracks appearing in reality. Last week I received a package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single item, a maintenance manual for communications equipment at Station Polaris. On the last page, someone had written a message in pencil. The new technician arrived yesterday. His name is David. He seems capable. I wonder how long he will last. They sent someone else. After everything that happened, after Thomas and me, they sent another person to that station. Another person to sit alone in the dark and listen to that signal and feel that presence growing stronger beneath the ice. I do not know if David is still there. I do not know if he has heard the signal yet or found the hatch or seen what rises from beneath the ice. But I know he will, because that thing is still there, still broadcasting, still waiting. And it will not stop, not until everyone hears it. Not until everyone understands that we are not alone on this planet, that we have never been alone, that beneath the ice and the earth and the deepest oceans, there are things that have been here longer than us and will be here long after we are gone. I still wake up at 3:17 a.m. every single night. I still hear that pattern in my head clearer than ever. And sometimes when the city is quiet and I am alone in the dark, I feel that vibration again. That pulse, that heartbeat from somewhere deep below. It is not just in the Arctic anymore. It is everywhere. Beneath every city, every town, every place humans have built their lives, there are deep places. And in those deep places, ancient things are stirring. The signal was never meant for me specifically. It was never meant for Thomas or David or anyone at Station Polaris. It was meant for all of us, the entire human race. A call from something that has been waiting longer than we can comprehend, something that has finally decided it is time for us to know it exists. I do not know what will happen next. I do not know if this is the beginning of something terrible or something beyond our capacity to judge. I only know that I heard that call. I stood before that rising structure and felt the weight of its attention, and I was forever changed. The ice is melting. Not just in the Arctic, but everywhere. The deep places are opening, and what has been sleeping is waking up. You have been warned. You have been told. What you do with this information is up to you. But if you ever find yourself in a remote place, far from civilization, and you hear something you cannot explain, a signal, a pattern, a vibration that seems to come from beneath the ground, do not ignore it. Do not dismiss it as your imagination. Listen carefully. Record it if you can. Document everything. Because that is how it begins. With a signal, with a pattern, with the realization that something vast and ancient and utterly alien has been beneath our feet all along, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. That moment is now. My name is Hank. I am 32 years old. I managed a communications tower in the Arctic for 2 months. I heard the signal that came from beneath the ice. I saw what rose when it called. And I am telling you that everything is about to change. The ice remembers everything. And what sleeps beneath has been patient long enough. If you are still watching this, if you have stayed with me until the very end, I need you to do something for me. Look up Station Polaris. Search for any information you can find. Ask questions. Demand answers. Because the more people who know about this, the harder it will be for them to hide it. 3 days ago, I saw a news report. A brief mention buried in the back pages. A research team in the Arctic reported unusual seismic activity near an old communication station. They sent a team to investigate. The station was empty. The equipment was still running, but the technician David was gone. No sign of struggle. No indication of where he went. He simply vanished. They found his journal. According to the report, it contained descriptions of auditory hallucinations and paranoid delusions. They classified it as another case of isolation-induced psychosis. They sealed the station. They are not sending anyone else. But I know the truth. David heard the call. He found the hatch. He went down into the deep places beneath the ice, and whatever he found there, whatever he understood, it took him. Or maybe he went willingly. Maybe, like me, he stood before that impossible structure and felt something beyond fear, a sense of recognition, a feeling that this is what humanity has been moving toward all along, that our entire history, our technology, our civilization, has been building to this moment. The moment when we finally hear the call from the deep places and understand that we are not the masters of this world. We never were. I still have nightmares, but they are different now. In these dreams, I am not standing on the ice looking down. I am beneath it in those deep, dark places, and I am not alone. There are others there. Thomas, David, all the people who heard the signal over the decades and centuries. All of us gathered in the darkness, listening to that ancient heartbeat, waiting. Waiting for the rest of humanity to join us. Waiting for the world above to crack open like an egg. Waiting for the deep things to rise. I do not know how much time we have. Months, years, maybe decades, but I know it is coming. The signs are everywhere if you know how to look. The increasing seismic activity, the strange signals detected by research stations around the world, the unexplained disappearances of people in remote locations. The deep places are opening. And when they finally open completely, when that ancient architecture rises from beneath the earth and the ice and the sea, humanity will have to face a truth we have been avoiding since we first looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. We are not alone. We have never been alone. And what shares this world with us is so old, so vast, so utterly beyond our comprehension, that our existence is little more than a brief dream in its endless waking. That is my story. That is my warning. Believe it or do not believe it. Share it or keep it to yourself. It does not matter. The truth does not need your belief to be true. The signal is broadcasting. The deep things are waking. And soon, everyone will hear what I heard in that frozen station 90 miles north of Deadhorse, Alaska. Soon everyone will know. The ice remembers everything. And it is time for us to remember too. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story affected you, if it made you think, if it gave you chills, please hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories from the edge of human experience. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, stay vigilant. Pay attention to the world around you. Listen for the signals. Watch for the signs. Because the deep places are opening and what emerges will change everything. My name is Hank. I survived Station Polaris, but I do not think any of us will survive what comes next. The call has been heard. The deep things are rising, and the ice remembers everything.